Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, so the ballot comes in, there's a question on it at the first level. It goes to the second level where a decision is made. Who is in that room when that decision is made?
So at the second level, it's one of our senior staff members. So this could be a supervisor, a manager that's making that decision. Now there are still multiple levels. So we would not make even after that second level review, it would take it going to a manager level review, a third level review to truly make that bad. But that's only after the cure period has been satisfied. So we're not making it before the election or even 2 days after the election. We would not make a signature bad. We've made every attempt. So after, and we log on the envelope itself, how many attempts we made to contact the voter to attempt to cure that signature. So it's gone through multiple levels of review before that signature would be made bad.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up, so Mr. Jarrett, when does a party representative, be it Democrat or Republican, when, if, and when does that come into play? When a ballot is determined to go into what stage of review, and if it's determined to not be acceptable as a valid vote.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Leach, the party representatives observe the process. They are not involved. So the political parties are able to assign observers to the signature verification process, the early voting process. I'll be discussing this in a little bit more detail further in the presentation, but also during the ballot tabulation center. But we hire Republicans and Democrats. We work with the parties to hire individuals that they would like to be involved in this process. So the individuals performing these reviews are Republicans, Democrats, independents, performing the signature review process, but the political party observers, they're just there to observe the process. Now, if they have a question, they can alert one of our managers, one of the supervisors over the room, and then discuss that with them and leadership within the elections department.
Mr. Chairman, if I could change just for a second, Mr. Jarrett, talk to me about the barcode and how that's unique. And from the other side, how can that be replicated, duplicated, forged? I think I've heard in discussions it referred to as an intelligent barcode. I'm not sure what discussion that came up into, but there's concerns that there were additional ballots put in, particularly in the mail-in system. Would you address that concern / allegation?
So, Mr. Leach, again, this area is under the recorder's office. However, I can talk to that specific barcode, and it is unique to each individual voter. And if we had to issue a subsequent ballot, we could cancel that first ballot and then issue a new ballot, which would have a different barcode.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jarrett, I have a couple of questions going back to your answers. One of the concerns that has been expressed by those who were supposed to be observing is that some were not allowed into the room, and I don't know what the protocol was for making a decision on who could and who couldn't be in the room. And then the other allegation is those that were allowed, they were kept so far away under the guise of COVID, they were kept so far away from the actual counting that it really wasn't an observation. So can you respond to that?
So yes, Mr. Chairman. So your first question about us not allowing individuals in the room, and that's not true. We had more observers involved in observing the election process than ever before. We had members from both parties through in every room, pretty much the entire process. And we worked with the parties. So we met with the parties in September, early September, to describe all the different opportunities that they would be allowed in which they could participate in observing through the selection process. So we had observers in every stage of the process, at the vote centers, following our couriers when we're picking up ballots from the process, or picking up ballots from those vote centers or drop boxes. We had observers in the EV processing rooms. That's where we separate the ballots from the envelopes. In the we had 2 rooms where signature verification was occurring. We had observers from both parties in those rooms. And then we also had observers in our ballot tabulation center. So it is not accurate, or those rumors are not true that we were not allowing observers into the process. Now, under COVID-19, we asked that observers maintain 6 feet of physical distancing. This was to keep our staff members safe. Well, the observation process, so those observers could see the screens. Now, they may not have been able to see every screen in the room, but they can overhear conversations between managers and supervisors. They could view many of the screens in the rooms. They could also hear us making calls to cure signatures with voters. So observation is not just a visual process, it's also what they hear, what they see, interactions between staff members and supervisors. And they were able to observe all of those. But we did also allow observers to bring binoculars if they wanted to get even a closer up view of what was on those signature verification screens. And then one last thing I'd like to say is we've had many court hearings where observers have provided testimony that they were able to observe. In that testimony in court, that they were able to walk through the process. They could view any computer screen they wanted. They could view 20 computer screens in one sitting. So in testimony in court, observers have stated that they were able to observe the process.
Well, I understand that, but there are also a lot that have said they haven't been able to. And by your own testimony just now, you stated that they were able to observe some of the screens, but not all of the screens, but they could listen. Listening is fine, but if you don't see the actual underlying ballot, how do you confirm just because you hear 2 people speaking? I don't understand that conclusion.
So Mr. Chairman, they were able to get a very good sampling by the screens that they could view to see if there were any issues or concerns through that signature verification process.
Well, and I understand that. I think that's a faulty conclusion because when you're talking about anything that may be a misdeed or even less than fraud, just mistakes, if you can't verify all of the screens, if you can't verify all of the processes, then it leaves some doubt as to whether the validity of this process was uniform. Again, I'm not making any allegations of fraud, but I am suggesting that if the entire process could not be observed by somebody who's independent or representing a party, both parties, this is not just one party, but both parties, then I think we have at least a little bit of a flaw in the system.
So, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to also discuss, we also went through a recent court hearing where a sampling of ballots was reviewed. And in that court hearing, the expert testimony from both parties said that the signatures that were reviewed through that process should identify, they did not identify a signature that would have resulted in a ballot not being counted. So even in a court hearing, the signature review process in Maricopa County, the evidence proved that we were doing our role and our job correctly.
With all due respect, as to that one particular provision, you've talked about all of the provisions that are in place, and so that testimony is referring to one particular provision of the process. Okay, please continue your presentation.
To that point,
Senator Michelle Ugenti-Rita.
thank you. Is it muted?
Nope.
Oh,
We
okay,
can-
good. Oh, okay, excellent. Sorry, I can't tell. To Mr. Farnsworth's point, could you tell me where either in statute or in the elections procedural manual it outlines the authority to change the protocols for poll watchers? So in other words, I know you made some adjustments because of COVID-19. Did you have that discretion? Or is it specifically outlined, or maybe there was an executive order that allowed for that discretion that didn't otherwise exist? Can you speak to that? And again, I'm just asking because I know that some adjustments adjustments were made because of COVID-19, and I wanted to understand the authority under which those adjustments were made.
Mr. Jarrett.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, so I can take your question and research the exact provisions in the statute that speak to the observers in this process. But I will say, this is the first election that we had any political party observers want to look at signature verification, EV processing. Every election prior to this election, they did not even ask to be in the room. So we had more scrutiny over this election than any election in our history in Maricopa County.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, do you have it to that point?
Yes. I'm sorry, I had my hand raised. This is D'Alessandro. Isn't it true that the judge threw out the claim pertaining to observers not having a meaningful opportunity to observe? Didn't the court say if those problems happen, it should have been brought at the time of the issue rather than after the election canvass? And I know, sir, that might not, the legal court decisions might not be part of your expertise, but is that not true that happened?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe you're correct, but Mr. Liddy is here and he will be providing a presentation as well. I believe he gets into those specific details.
Thank you so much.
And I look forward to hearing from Mr. Liddy, but based on what was just stated by Senator D'Alessandro, that would be a procedural issue of having missed a time rather than the actual merits of the question. So with that, Mr. Jarrett, and I apologize to everybody, I can only see 5 people because I'm not controlling the screen. So I'll try to monitor better. Mr. Leach, do you have a question? If you have it to that point, your hand is up on the screen.
No, Mike, that was from before, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
No
the
problem.
Electronics are eating me up. I'll get rid of it.
Okay, I already did. Senator Ugenti-Rita, do you want to continue?
I have other questions, but they're on other like ID issues. Jared,
Okay.
Are you going to keep going with?
Yes, we'll continue with
Okay.
the presentation until people have questions. So Mr. Jarrett, please continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the last piece and really the last step after we go through that signature verification process is then bring those envelopes into, and we use bipartisan boards, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, separating those ballots from the envelopes, putting them into batches of 200, and then creating logs and these custody transfer slips that transfer them to our ballot tabulation center to where they would be tabulated. So the next step of the process is voting in person. And this actually covers early voting in person as well as election day. So all voters, and this is a recent change as well out of the 2019 legislation, that all voters, whether they vote early or on election day, must show a valid ID. So in Maricopa County, we've established a site book check-in station to help expedite the check-in process. This is what really allowed us to manage the flow in our vote centers for the November election. We could have 9 to 15 people checking in simultaneously. However, there's a control process. There's a stopgap. Voters can scan their ID, but they can only progress so far until they have to show that ID to one of our poll workers. The site books do not let them progress until one of our poll workers comes up with a unique badge. They scan that badge. They are then required to log the type of ID in the site book that that voter showed before they're allowed to progress through and then have a ballot printed for them. We also, for this election, we went to a vote center model. In Maricopa County, we have over 5,400 ballot styles. And we had to purchase ballot on demand printers to be able to provide that voter their correct ballot style. We use control slips that are printed from our sitebook check-in stations along with the ballot style to marry those up and to ensure that we give the voter their correct ballot style. Then, I think, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita has a question.
Okay, I don't see her hand up
Oh,
in here, but
sorry.
Senator Ugenti-Rita?
Okay. Yes, thank you so much. Scott, what do you do to make sure federal-only ballots have a signature, or not a signature, but a ID check?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, so for federal-only voters, actually, there's additional steps and security measures for a Fed-only voter. So if you are a Fed-only voter, you cannot have a ballot mailed to you for your first election. You have to vote in person for the very first time.
Okay.
And then they would follow a very similar process as any other voter. They would have to show an ID, a valid ID, as required by state law to progress through the process and get a Fed-only vote, a Fed-only ballot. However, we had, I think it was right around 700 Fed-only provisional ballots that when a voter in this election came in and they said no, they demanded to vote a full ballot. They said that they were not a Fed-only voter. Well, because that status, because through that control slip, we knew that they were a Fed-only voter. They had not proved citizenship yet, that we printed them that if they demanded to vote that full ballot based on HAVA, we have to let them vote that full ballot. However, we do it through a provisional process. So we let them vote provisionally. And then that gives them the opportunity to cure that ballot. If they were able to come back and prove citizenship through that cure process, then that full ballot would have counted. If they did not prove citizenship, then we would have to duplicate those ballots and duplicate that ballot onto a Fed-only ballot. So yes, a Fed-only voter has to prove identity through the same process that any voter would through that check-in process.
Wonderful, thank you. That was helpful. Do you know offhand how many of those provisionals ultimately ended up being validated and voting a whole ballot?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, I don't know the exact number, but I know that there were 700 or so that we had to duplicate onto a Fed-only ballot. So those were provisionals that the voter did not come in and provide us sufficient identification or proof of citizenship.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, you referred to the voting centers and the need for on-demand printing ballots because of the number of unique ballots who's in control of printing that, and is that printed in conjunction with the Dominion voting machines? Is that separate? How is that handled? And then follow-up question to that would be, there are allegations out there that ballots came in from across state lines. There's been discussion about an audit of the cast vote record and whether or not that cast
EBR.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would that show up? In other words, where I'm going, Mr. Jarrett, is a ballot printed in Arizona, does it have special watermarks or something that would identify it as only an Arizona printed ballot, and would eliminate the question of out-of-state ballots coming across state lines?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Leach, so the first question, who has control over the printing process? So that is our poll workers entirely. So a voter would have to check into our site book check-in system. They'd have to show that ID. The poll worker would have to verify their ID, and then after they complete that check-in process, then that ballot would be sent to the printers. Our clerks man those printers, and they're the ones responsible for ensuring that that ballot with that control slip are married up and then issued to that voter. Now, to discuss the second question, are those connected to our Dominion voting machines? So our sitebook check-in stations have zero connection to our Dominion tabulators. The tabulators are separate, and that is part of the certification process. I know questions about that, and I'll talk about how we certify this equipment in a few slides as I progress through this presentation. but they are separate. They're not connected in any way. And then the third question about overstate ballots and being able to have those ballots in our election system, that's absolutely not possible. So for each election, we create an election program. So, and then those ballots are unique to that election program. That's created by our tabulation staff here on site in our tabulation center. So those ballots then get timing marks that are on the sides that tell the ballot or tell our tabulators how to read and tabulate those ballots. Those hash codes and those timing marks are unique to that specific election. So no other election in the entire country has that specific unique timing marks that are on that ballot. So our tabulators would not read any ballot unless it was programmed in our tabulation center. And that programming happens approximately 1 month before the election. And then that programming is tested during the logic and accuracy test that's performed by, and there's actually 4 different logic and accuracy tests that occur. And I'll talk in more detail of those in a second. But we perform our own logic and accuracy tests on 100% of the equipment, our tabulation staff do, before every election and after every election. And then we also have the Secretary of State, based on state statute, also perform an independent logic and accuracy test before every election. For Maricopa County, that happened on October 6th, 2020, the day before we mailed all of our ballots.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and Scott, does that refer back to the 2% audit? Is that connected in with a logic and accuracy test?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Leach, the 2% hand count audit, that's a separate process, and I will be describing that in more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to ask a couple of questions since we got into the issue of showing a valid ID. Showing a valid ID applies when you vote in person, which is what I generally like to do. I like the experience. But there are some concerns that we've expressed at the legislature for some years, and those have to do with, so tell me, do we require ID when we register to vote?
So when a member registers to vote, the process is that they have to prove citizenship and residency. So they would have to provide the required documentation to register to vote. So that's either showing an ID or registering through Service Arizona, where the Service Arizona website validates their identity. The specifics of that do fall under the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, and they would be able to provide further details of the exact steps that we take to register voters. Right,
but I think there are alternative forms of identification that really aren't a birth certificate or an ID, if I'm not mistaken. That has been and continues to be a concern, and I recognize that may be in a little different office, but it goes to the point that I'm trying to get to the bottom of. So if we don't require adequate identification on registering to vote, then checking a signature on an early ballot assumes that the person who, when they registered, was justified in registering. They met the qualifications. They showed the alternate ID, which I don't think is secure enough, in my personal opinion. Is that accurate? So you wouldn't be checking the original, you wouldn't be checking to see if the person is actually a citizen, is able to vote legally. You're just basing it upon the registration. Is that correct?
So through the ID check for the early ballots, through the signature verification process, we are checking it to make sure that their signature matches. The registration process is what verifies that they have residency in Arizona and that they have citizenship.
Right. Okay. So you confirmed what I just said. How do we and maybe I'll save this question for later. I've just written down a few questions that I'd like to understand. So how do we deal with the drop-off centers and the ID and the chain of custody in a drop-off center? My understanding is that there were a number of drop-off centers that were not manned, Again, I think the intent was valid to try to make it available to as many people as possible by having drop-off centers around the county. But my understanding is that they were not manned or monitored, and so they were simply picked up. Can you explain to me the chain of custody in those drop-off centers between the drop-off and getting to the elections department and verification of identity?
So, Mr. Chairman, so in Maricopa County, voters had the option to drop off their ballots at any one of our vote centers, which we had 175 on election day. The weekend before, we had 100 vote centers, or any one of our drop-off locations, which were in city government buildings, city clerk buildings, or drive-through drop boxes, which were manned by bipartisan staff members. So those ones specifically that you're referring to, the unmanned ones, those were in government facilities, city clerks' offices, town offices, some Maricopa County libraries. We had staff members, or there were government employees there to monitor. So this is required by the Elections Procedures Manual to have 100% supervision and security over that drop box while it's in that government building. Now we send out teams, courier teams. These are members of different parties to retrieve those ballots on a daily basis. When they retrieve those ballots from those drop boxes, they also have to do it with either the inspector if it's at a vote center, or the appointee from the city clerk's office. They're opening those early ballot drop boxes. There we have tamper evidence seals with serial numbers affixed to those boxes. They have to break those serial numbers. They have to log the serial numbers on what we call a ballot transfer custody form. They compare that the serial number from the day before matches what's still on that box to confirm that box wasn't opened between their route from the day before. They take those ballots out in the presence of that city clerk or the inspector. Again, we have our courier teams are 2-member teams of different parties. They transfer that to a transfer bin. They then affix that transfer bin with tamper evidence seals with security numbers. Those are logged on that ballot transfer custody form. When they put those ballots in that, they then reclose the early ballot drop box. They add the new seals onto that drop box and they log those. So then that 2-member team brings those, they continue on their route, picking up ballots at either vote centers or drop boxes, and then they bring that back to McTech. For this election, again, I mentioned one of the first times that we've had observers partnered with this process. We had political party observers following our couriers as they went through and performed these pickups. And then when they followed them all the way back to our department headquarters here, our McTech Tabulation Center. And then we had a team reviewing those ballot transfer custody forms, making sure that the seals, when they returned, had not been removed, that they matched what was logged on those forms. And then we do 100% count of all those ballots, and then we leave those in our ballot vault until we take them to the next day to scan them in and to start the signature verification process.
Are you aware of any courier teams that were not made up of 2 individuals of different parties?
I am not aware, Mr. Chairman, I am not aware. I am aware that we had one complaint on the very first day of early voting when we sent out a team, a 2-member team, and that 2-member team did not both go into the vote center to retrieve the ballots. One member of the team stayed in the van, and one member went inside, opened the ballot box in the presence of the inspector. They signed off on the form. That was not in accordance with our training. However, we corrected that for every future date after that first day of early voting. And that was only 1-member team. Mr. Chairman, I think you're on mute. Sir.
Yep, I appreciate that. Senator Ugenti Rita, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Scott, you already went over, and if we could just go back for a moment, the signature verification process. And I just wanted to get a little clarity. Tell me if I've got this right. So there's like a first round, and that's done by individuals who have roughly 4 hours of training. And if there's an issue with that signature, it goes to what we call like a second round, where someone else, a manager of some type, maybe even with more training, would then look at the issue and make a determination on what happens next. But on that first round, can you speak to how many signatures are okayed at that initial first round with the individuals who have the 4 hours of training?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, I don't have the specific numbers. I do know that about 1% on average for most elections go through and require a second round of review. But I do also want to add a little bit more clarity to that first round. Okay. So they can make a signature good, but we then do a 2% audit of every single signature that goes through and is basically determined as a good signature from that first round. And that's done by our manager level staff. And they're doing that to confirm that that first group, that first tier, is doing their jobs correctly. They can identify if there's any trends or patterns that are happening that that first tier would not be doing correctly. And then they could then address that through training or identify if maybe we need to make a staffing decision. And through that audit process, we did not find any concerns within this election.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to sum up. So the vast majority of signatures are, for lack of a better technical term, okayed or deemed sufficient at that first level. There's a process if for whatever reason there's a process to manage the signatures that are not okayed, and then you have the backup of auditing a random sample of 2% from those individuals for quality control. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, that is correct. There are, and as I described on the prior slide, there's still many other front-end controls that we use over this process, from the form of sending out those 90-day postcards to make sure that those ballots were sent to the correct address. Every time we mail out a ballot, we do an address check verification to make sure that that is going to that voter. So and then voters add those phone numbers, and we can compare that phone number to the file, and we can even compare the handwriting on the phone number itself.
But the vast majority are being okayed at that first round. That's just what I was getting at.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, you're correct.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for your clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Leach, your digital hand is up. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, let me switch a little bit. There have been allegations around the country regarding that the power was shut off at some of the voting centers in some of the states, or the ballot. I shouldn't say voting centers. I should say the ballot tabulating areas. Did that happen in Arizona at all, to your knowledge?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Leach, no, it did not happen in Maricopa County, to my knowledge.
So the follow-up, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, we saw spikes in the vote, what people are reporting as spikes in the vote counts. If there wasn't, in fact, any shutdowns, what would you say about the spikes, and why are we seeing the spikes in the vote counts?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Leach, Maricopa County, there were no spikes. And in fact, once you go through the analysis, and actually Mr. Liddy will include some of this in his presentation, every single data reporting after Election Day describes the opposite of what those spikes are saying. They're saying that there was unusual spikes in the favor of Biden. In Maricopa County, actually nearly every single report subsequent to Election Day favored President Trump. And I can just tell you most likely why that was. So in Maricopa County, the vast majority of our early voting, especially those first few weeks of early voting through mail and in person, Democrats were turning out in much higher numbers than Republicans were. But as we got to the tail end of early voting, Republicans started coming out, and they actually surpassed the early turnout for what Democrats turned out for. Now, when we reported results at 8 p.m. on election night, those were just early ballots. And at that point in time, we were through the Friday before the election. So that's what the ballots that we reported at 8 p.m. on election night. were everything that we had received by early morning on Friday. Well, the vast majority of those include more Democrats than Republicans. But then as we reported results on Wednesday, the day after the election, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those were ballots from Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then what were returned as late earlies on Tuesdays, or on Tuesday. So those were all then where predominantly those were including Republican ballots. So the spikes that have been described are not consistent with what we see in Maricopa County.
Mr. Chairman, those ballot, and Scott, those ballots that were counted Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, after Election Day, what is the chain of custody? How are those held and protected? Who has access, who doesn't have access, in what form are they held, and how are they protected so that numbers can't increase or decrease?
So those ballots, until they are signature verified, are kept in the envelope, and they are stored in a vault with our vendor that scans these in for us and scans those signature. That's at Runbeck. So they're held in a vault. We have a sheriff's deputy at our Runbeck vendor maintaining that chain of custody. As soon as those ballots go through a signature verification, they are either approved that with a good signature, then those are transmitted and transferred to us. We send over a 2-member team to pick up those ballots and bring those ballots to our McTech Tabulation Center. Then they go through a bipartisan board where they separate those ballots from the envelope. Those ballots, again, we have a transmittal slip that at that point in time, the ballot is secret. Once it's been separated from the envelope, based on Arizona Constitution, every voter is entitled to have a secret ballot. But those ballots are still, we have a transmittal slip that shows how many were in that batch, how many were transferred to our tabulation center. So when our tabulators, the staff that are working our tabulation equipment, they check to make sure that those numbers reconcile before they tabulate and after, to make sure that what went through our tabulators matches what was sent to them from those EV processing boards. So there's no opportunity from the time we receive it, while they're stored in the vault. Every single step of the process, we have transmittal slips to check and verify that the numbers in those batches stay the same through that entire process. Now, there are opportunities when those EV processing boards are sorry, we're having a connection issue. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can.
So when those EV processing boards are doing their inspection of the ballots, so they're separating those envelopes or separating the ballots from the envelopes, they're also looking for damaged ballots. So a ballot that might be torn. So then those might go into a separate batch because those can't be read by our tabulators. But then there's a separate transmittal tracking slip that would then send that to our tabulation team. So every single ballot is accounted for constantly, and we could verify and confirm that no ballots would be inserted into that process.
And while, Mr. Chairman, and while everybody's entitled to a private ballot, there is identification marks on there referring to precinct. Is that not correct?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that is correct. That we do have a code on there that it can be traced back to the specific precinct in which a voter voted that ballot or where they live.
And Mr. Chairman, one final question in this segment is, should there be an audit sooner or later? Would any interruption of power or any interruption of the vote tabulator show up on an audit process?
Mr. Chairman, members, it would depend on the specifics of exactly what the audit reviewed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please proceed. Mr. Jarrett, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was through the first 2 bullet points on this slide, those related to both Election Day and early voting. And then I was going to describe step 2A in this process, but because that related to how we transferred ballots from vote centers and drop boxes. But based on your question, Mr. Chairman, I've already described that process. So then the next piece would be just for election day. So we only use our precinct-based tabulators on election day. And this is actually comes out of statute because every early ballot must go through a signature verification process. So that's why we do not use our tabulators prior to election day. And also for security reasons, we do not use our tabulators prior to election day. So our tabulators are programmed only to read election day ballot styles. We do this for many reasons, because there could be some voters that would bring in their early ballot and try to have their early ballot counted. Our tabulator wouldn't read it. There's also voters that may be upset that they were given a provisional ballot and they don't insert their provisional ballot in the envelope, and then they might try to insert that into the tabulator. Well, that would our tabulators would not accept a provisional ballot or an early ballot in our vote centers. Our tabulators also use 2 memory cards per tabulator. Now these memory cards are encrypted. They also have to be programmed at the exact same time in our ballot tabulation center. So you have to have access to our ballot tabulation center. You have to program those 2 cards at the exact same time, otherwise the tabulator won't work. And then we insert those memory cards into the tabulators. Those external ports are affixed with tamper evidence seals, so we would know if anyone tried to tamper with those memory card slots while those tabulators are out at our vote centers. We create a precinct ballot report where those seals are logged. Our poll workers then compare that those seals are accurate when they're opening the polls. We also have a security key, a fob key. So in order to turn on those tabulators and open the polls, they have to have that physical security key, and they have to have a password that we've given our poll workers before they can open those polls and they're ready to use on election day. We also then have our poll workers run what we call a zero tape. So they run a tape. It's like an old-fashioned tape register. It prints out from the precinct or from the precinct-based tabulator, and it shows that every contest that's programmed in this election has a 0 vote. And our poll workers review that report, that receipt tape, and then they sign off on that ballot custody report, verifying that there was a 0 for that tabulator when they're using it to start the election day. Our poll workers then, at the close of business, they will, and all of this is done by 2 poll workers at different parties. They will go to that tabulator, they will run actually the results tape. They sign off on that results tape, how every ballot was tabulated through election day. They also write the total number of ballots that were tabulated on that precinct ballot report. They sign off on that report. They then remove one of those memory cards. They break the seal. They log that seal number again on that precinct ballot report. They take that memory card, put it in a little container that we provide them, put it in a bubble pack, and then we have 2 members from different parties transport the ballots. So they have to have a key to open up that ballot box. They take those ballots out, they put them in a black canvas bag, they seal that black canvas bag with a tamper evidence seal. That tamper evidence seal, that number is logged on that ballot custody report. So those ballots, that one single memory card, and any other critical documents that we need, like that ballot custody report, are then transferred to one of our receiving sites in Maricopa County. Our receiving sites are staffed with members from different parties. In this election, we used actually county employees from any one of our 50 county departments, and we made sure that they're from different parties. We also had MCSO sheriff deputies providing security over every receiving site. When those trucks left that receiving site and came back to McTech, our tabulation center, they were escorted by 2 sheriff's deputies cars, sheriff deputy patrol vehicles with patrol deputies in those cars, ensuring the chain of custody all the way from the receiving site to McTech. Once those cards and those ballots are received by McTech. We do an inventory. We confirm that the seal numbers match. We bring those into our tabulation center. There's political party observers that were here present through that entire process, observing how we read in those memory cards on election night. So, Mr. Chairman, any questions before I move on to the next slide and talk about the tabulation process?
Any questions by the committee members? Mr. Borelli.
Unmute. Let me see my notes here. Were any of the ballots printed by a commercial printer at all? Mr. Chairman and Mr. Elections guy.
Mr. Jarrett.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, so we, yes, we do have commercial printers that we use. We stress test every single one of our printers when testing them and readying them for this election. We had 3 different printers. One's a Lexmark and 2 others are from Oki. And we use those printers to print those ballots on demand in our vote centers.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry, I forget your name, sir.
It's Mr. Jarrett.
Mr. Jarrett, yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Jarrett. So, but everything is printed on site? Nothing is printed outside sources?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, so for 171 of our vote centers, 100% of the ballots were printed through our ballot on demand printers. We had 4 vote centers where we did send pre-printed ballots to those voting locations. And those 4 vote centers, one was in Aguila, one was in Rio Verde, so it's north of Fountain Hills area, one was in Gaka Village on the Tohono O'odham Nation, and one was in San Lucie. And the reason we sent those 4 locations pre-printed ballots is it's very unlikely that a voter, out-of-precinct voter, would vote at those locations. And if an out-of-precinct voter did vote, we could have them vote on our accessible voting device. And the reason we made that decision is we wanted to expand the amount of vote centers that we could offer in this location. We were constrained by the number of ballot on demand printers that we could get due to COVID-19. The supply chain, we could only get enough to serve right around 170 voting locations. By not putting ballot on demand printers in those 4 locations, we were able to actually expand up to 175 voting locations.
Yes, so another follow-up question. So, Mr. Jarrett, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, did the county use Runback Printing? Do they have a contract with Runback Printing for Maricopa County ballots?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, yes, that is correct. We use Runback, and they print all of our early ballots that go out through the mail.
Right, and of course, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Jarrett, and everything that goes out in the mail, everything is folded, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, that's correct. In order for, we have a 19-inch ballot, and the only way for it to fit in the envelope that we mail to voters is to fold that ballot.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I have another follow-up. On a provisional ballot, you know, because some folks, they show up, they got their one they mailed in ballot or whatever, and or they didn't have it. They said that, you know, it had been cases where someone said, well, somebody already voted for you, you're on the early ballot list, and then of course they say, I don't want to vote by mail, I want to do it in person. Are they handed a provisional ballot flat, pristine, or is that also folded in a pre-stuffed envelope?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, if they have not returned their early ballot, and we can confirm that through our sitebook check-in station, that voter would be issued actually a regular ballot, and we would cancel that early ballot. So, and that's one of the reasons we have so few provisional ballots in Maricopa County, in addition to the vote centers that we use.
Yes.
So, but if a voter, any provisional voter, comes into our voting location, that ballot is printed using one of our ballot on demand printers, and a provisional ballot envelope is also printed, and our poll workers are trained to guide them on how to fold the ballot so it will fit into the provisional ballot envelope.
Right, okay, so either way, they're gonna have a folded ballot going in an envelope. Nothing is pristine, flat, and goes right directly into a machine, because everything is put in an envelope and sent to the tabulating center, correct?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, so if you vote using election day ballot, those are not folded, but any ballot that does go into an envelope is folded,
Okay. Thank
whether
you.
that be an early ballot or a provisional ballot.
Well, because if they show up at the polling center, they're gonna show an ID, they're gonna be given a ballot, but if there's one, a provisional that needs to be, obviously, later on, gets stuffed in a ballot. So my next question is on the adjudicated ballots, where, there's a coffee stain on one ballot that gets sent in via mail, however, and they have to do adjudication and obviously, swap vote for vote, and it's all observed. Is that ballot also folded, or is that run through pristine, non-folded?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, so yes, we have a variety of reasons why we might have to duplicate a ballot. And so I think that's the process you're describing. And that's when we have, and those reasons could be because they are uniform overseas and military members, right? They return ballots to us through a secure portal. We had about so we had just over 27,000 ballots that we had to duplicate for this election.
Okay.
A little over 9,000 of those were those UOCAVA ballots. We also had Braille ballots. We had special election board ballots, which are large print ballots that we mail out to voters. But they then could be those damaged ballots. So they're torn, there's a coffee spill on those. So those could come from the vote centers and maybe would have a fold, or they could come back to us through an envelope, through the mail, and they are torn or have that damage.
Yeah.
So when we duplicate those ballots, the original ballot may have folds, but the actual duplicated ballot does not have a fold. Those are printed at our vendor Runback, and they're returned to us as a straight ballot without a fold in it.
And of course, then it's documented that it was adjudicated and there's witnesses and so on and so forth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no more questions at this time.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Senator Ugenti-Rita?
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Back to the mail-in ballots. What do you do with ballots that look like the seal's been broke or it hasn't been, properly sealed? There's a tear, things like that. So the ballot itself is legible, but it doesn't look like perhaps it was securely put in the envelope. What's the process for dealing with those mail-in ballots?
So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Ugenti-Rita, or Senator Ugenti-Rita, so as long as they're sealed appropriately, so the voter has an opportunity. If they made a mistake on the envelope, they can request a new one, or they could go vote in person. If the ballot is actually sealed back correctly and has their initials, then we would go ahead and then count that. If it does not, then we would need to have them get a replacement ballot.
So, right, so this is not properly sealed. For whatever reason, it comes unglued, something like that. So when when that kind of ballot is received by the recorder's office, what happens? Do you count it, or do you reach out to the person because it wasn't properly sealed and ask them to come in? Just curious.
So if it was, the envelope was torn or was not sealed correctly, yes, they would have to reach out to the voter and have them confirm that their ballot was either voted that way, or to get a replacement ballot and request a new ballot.
Got it. Excellent. Mr. Chairman, just another question, if I may. What is a voting cast record?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, so that is the record that shows if a voter participated in any election. And that is retained in the voter registration system under the recorder's office.
So it's an aggregate amount, or
no?
Total? No, it's each individual person's recorded vote or recorded mark that they voted in that election.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, yes. So it's whether so their record of which elections they participated in. Yes, so it would show whether for the voter cast record for the November general election, it would show yes, they participated, or no, they didn't
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, Mr. Jarrett, please continue.
The next portion of my presentation will be discussing tabulation at primarily our central count tabulation center. So, and we do many things to confirm the accuracy of our tabulation, and for me to have confidence that our tabulation is accurate. And one of the first things we did with our equipment, our new equipment that we use for this 2020 election cycle, was before we even finalized the contract with the vendor, we performed 100% hand count in the November 2019 election, and it was all mail election, but we chose one jurisdiction, the Madison Unified School District, I believe it's the elementary school district, where they had 11,888 ballots. And we did 100% hand count to verify that the tabulation equipment matched what our human hand count boards determined. Well, actually, when we went through that process, when we ran the ballots through the equipment, we knew what the equipment had determined. We didn't tell our hand count boards what those results would be. We did it in batches of 200. We had then our human hand counters go through and then do the counts themselves, and then they would compare the batches at the end. And actually, we found there were 8 variances through this process. But after research, the 8 variances were all due to human error. We could trace it right back to the humans that made the error. The machines were 100% accurate. But so after we went through that process, we were confident this system is accurate. Now, we've also done 3 separate hand counts for the 2020 election cycle. This was in the March presidential preference election, the August primary election, and the November general election. These hand counts, and there's been a lot of question about doing an independent audit. Well, this is an independent audit. These hand counts are performed by the political parties themselves. We don't hire these staff. The chairman for each party appoints individuals. The county chairman for each party appoints individuals to come perform these hand count audits. What they do is, and I want to describe the process for you. So in the central count environment, when we're tabulating ballots in batches of 200. The political party observers that are in our central count tabulation center, they identify which batches that they want. As they're observing these ballots go through the machines, they'll say, I want that batch selected for the hand count. And then we'll immediately take that ballot, that batch, box it, and then seal it with tamper-evident tape, and hold it for the hand count. As they go through, and they'll keep selecting those, the different observers. And eventually we get enough that can then be randomly drawn later during the hand count selection process. When we go through that hand count selection process, we also have all of our precinct-based tabulators, all the ballots that came back from all the vote centers. So on that Wednesday after the election, statute requires we start the hand count process on the day after the election. The political party chairs come in, and then they are part of a random draw of which ballots will be selected to perform a hand count. So all 175 vote centers are put into basically a hat in which they draw. 175 are there. We did 2%. They were able to draw out the 4 vote centers that we ended up selecting for the hand count. We also, they then select from those batches that were identified by the political party observers. They randomly select those. And then we start that hand count process. We started it for this election on the Saturday after the election. And these were, again, appointees by the political parties coming in, and we do 5 different contests. We did 5,000 ballots for early ballots. We did just over 2% of all of our vote centers as required by statute. And they stacked too. It ended up being over 47,000 votes. Precisely 47,311 votes were reviewed through this hand count process for the November 2020 general election. And every single vote that was reviewed was consistent with what the tabulators found. Now, We don't show those hand count boards what the tabulators found until after they do their hand count process. So again, it's a blind count. They're stacking these ballots to determining how many votes were for President Trump, how many votes were President Biden. They looked at the Senate contest as well. They looked at the Corporation Commission. They looked at one of the propositions. And as they went through each of those, they found for all 3 elections, there was no variance. We also perform a logic and accuracy test. I talked about this briefly earlier, before each of these elections. So the logic and accuracy test that's performed by Maricopa County itself, we do that on 100% of our equipment that's going out. We need to make sure that the election code for that specific election is installed on that tabulator correctly. Then we also invite the Secretary of State's office to come in and perform their own logic and accuracy test. So they have a copy of the code that we deliver to them through a secure encrypted thumb drive. They mark ballots. They don't tell us how those ballots are marked, but they know what the results should be. And then they run those ballots through the tabulators. That's a sampling of all of our precinct-based tabulators, as well as our central count tabulators. They also use our accessible voting devices, which is that creates, it's a ballot marking device essentially, and they create those ballots and then they run those through the tabulators. And in those logic and accuracy tests, they found that our equipment was 100% accurate. Then we do a post logic and accuracy test after the election. So the first one's done before we mail out any ballots. The second one's done after the election. And the purpose of that is to confirm that the program that was used and installed on the equipment before the election matches the same program that was used throughout the entire process and was installed at the end of the election. And for the November general election, we actually invited the Secretary of State's office to do another logic and accuracy test. Typically, the post logic and accuracy test is just performed by the counties. However, because we heard some of the concerns from the public, we wanted another independent review, and they came back and they performed that review in addition. Now, I've heard some questions about, well, how do you know that the software wasn't changed in between those two processes, right? What if someone were to try to switch that software and use a different software? Well, that's not possible without it being detected. And I can tell you a few reasons why. First off, when we print the ballots, those 2 million ballots that we print and we sent to voters in this election, well, they're specific to that one specific election for the November general election. If there was someone that came in and altered that in any way and put a new election on there, those ballots that we had mailed out to voters would not read by our tabulators, not read in our precinct-based tabulators. So immediately when those ballots started coming back and we started running them through our tabulators, none of them would read. So we would know that that software or that program had been altered. But also we have, all of our tabulators are under 24/7 video camera feed. We also have security protocols with our tabulators in our central count tabulation room. So similar to our precinct-based tabulators, I talked about a security fob or that key. In order for you to make any changes to our tabulator, you need that key, and you need an administrative password, and you need another password, a PIN, for the actual tabulator itself. When we set those tabulators up, once that program is installed, we put it in user mode. When that tabulator is in user mode, the only thing that can happen on that tabulator is to run ballots or reject ballots. And you still need a series of 2 passwords to be able to log into that tabulation equipment. You need the password to get into the computer and that security passcode to get into the tabulator itself. So there's really no possible way for the program itself to be altered during the course of the election. And the logic and accuracy test before and after proved that the software wasn't altered or tampered with in any way during the election. The other thing that assures me that our system was accurate, and this is one of the benefits of our new tabulation equipment, is that we offer Maricopa County voters a brand new ballot design. For this election, we were using ovals. In the 2016 election, we are using arrows for voters. And that new ballot design allowed us to offset those columns. So another issue that we've heard is the use of Sharpie markers through the process and allowing voters to use those on election day. And that is absolutely correct. We wanted voters to use Sharpie markers on election day. And the reason was because those Sharpie markers dry faster. So when we insert a ballot on election day through the tabulators, they're creating that digital image of the ballot. Because they're creating an actual photocopy or that image of the ballot, we have a Mylar film that is very close to that ballot and actually touches that ballot. We need that ink to be dry. And the Sharpies are some of the fastest drying ink on the market. We tested it with ballpoint pens, and the ballpoint pens actually do not dry nearly as fast, and they actually smudge the tabulators. If that smudge or that residue continues to build up, it would render our tabulators inoperable on election day. And if we had and even though we sent out to every vote center 2 tabulators, if we had tabulators fail on election day, that would create long lines, that would create and we actually did have some voters use a ballpoint pen, and we had a couple voting locations where we had to replace those tabulators. But because of the new ballot design, those ovals are offset. So when bleed through does occur with the Sharpie marker, it would not affect the tabulation of any specific ballot. Because on the opposite side of the ballot, that oval is not where you filled in the oval from the front side, you turn it over to the back side, any of that bleed through does not overlap with an oval on the back side. And we can prove this through the number of overvotes when you compare the number of overvotes to 2016 to 2020. So on this slide, I've shown, and this was consistent for every single contest on the ballot. What I'm showing here on the slide is just for the presidential line. But in 2016, voters were 6 times more likely to overvote the presidential contest. And an overvote is so for the presidential contest, for example, it's a vote for one. If you fill in one oval in that contest, that would not be an overvote. But if you filled in 2, you voted for both Trump and Biden, or both Trump and Jorgensen, or one of the candidates and the write-in, that would create an overvote situation. Except for if the voter voted for one of the candidates, say Biden, and then they also wrote in Biden's name, and then they filled in the over for Biden, that would create an overvote in the precinct. However, because 100% of write-ins go through electronic adjudication, we train our electronic adjudication boards to look for that specific situation and then remove the vote in the write-in candidate, which would then no longer allow it to be an overvote, and then that would have been awarded to the candidate that received that vote. The other thing that we look at is undervotes. So this is when voters leave a contest entirely blank. And this does happen even on the presidential line. So in 2016, voters were 3 times more likely to undervote the presidential contest, leave it completely blank. So not only did we have higher turnout in this November general election, the voters that actually cast and voted their ballots, more votes were actually counted as well in this election. So a much more accurate tabulation system, and this is a result of not only our new ballot design, but the legislation that Mr. Chairman Farnsworth, that you sponsored, the electronic adjudication, allowed us to use that process to ensure that we are counting more votes for voters in this election than any election that we've had in the past. We also have a very reliable system, and a system that's done with integrity. And and we can confirm this through the certification process. And I know there was questions about exactly what we do for certification. So this is the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission that performs, and this is at the federal level, that does a certification. They do a robust series of tests using accredited voting system testing laboratories. So these voting system testing laboratories have to be approved by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So that's the standard setting board for all IT controls, cybersecurity controls, they're one of the gold standards in setting how all of these security provisions and protocols keep our systems safe. So they accreditate and recommend these voting system testing laboratories to do this work. The U.S. Elections and System Commission will then approve those voting system testing laboratories, and they do a robust set of tests to look at the source code, look at the hardening of the device, look at the security of the device to make sure that it's not susceptible to being hacked before they certify it. They make every attempt to try to break into that equipment, see if it would be susceptible. They will not certify unless it goes through this process. But then, because of the state legislature, they require that we also go through the Secretary of State certification program as well. And this equipment did do that. That was done by the Secretary of State in the fall of 2009. It was certified. They have a review committee. They bring in members from the universities, and they do similar type testing to ensure that this equipment will be reliable and can be used in the state of Arizona and is accurate. Other reasons why I know that this election was done with reliability and integrity is we invited political party observers to review the process. We've already talked through this today at this hearing. And we did. We had more observers involved in this process than ever before. We had them in our early vote centers. We had them at election day. We had them following our couriers. We had them in every room in early voting, our signature verification room, as well as in tabulation adjudication. And I would go down and daily, as I would walk through the tabulation center, I would have conversations with these observers, and they would identify, some concerns that they had or questions, and I would walk through and talk with them. So I'm confident that they could see and observe the processes, and we welcome these observers to the process. They play an incredibly important role to add integrity to the tabulation process. I have another slide on tabulation, but wanted to open it up to the committee if they had any questions before I move on.
Thank you, Senator Ugenti-Rita.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Just so I'm following, are these the observers that had to stand a minimum of 6 feet away or 6 feet away? Are we talking about the same observers?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, so in our tabulation center, those observers actually do a lot more than just observe. So okay. When we are, every day before we start tabulating, they come over to our equipment, they log what the ending count is or the beginning count before we start tabulation. They also log on a separate report, that same report, but the ending count. And then they come and compare those numbers the day before and day after. In the tabulation center, they were able to go up to any one of our screens. Now we did, so that for the early part of tabulation, we let them walk the aisles as they wanted to. However, they were having conversations with our adjudicators as well as the other observers, and we had some of our adjudicators concerned that they were distracting them from their work. So what we asked them to do was we did set up a 6-foot limit, but then we asked if they wanted to go observe closer. They just needed to get permission from our manager overseeing the process, and they would allow them to walk the aisle to get much closer to the electronic adjudication, as well as the duplication process. They were not 6 feet behind. They were able to get real close and see everything that occurred. Excuse me.
Okay. So I hate to keep belaboring. I'm a little confused.
Oh, go ahead, Senator.
Okay. So did they have to stay 6 feet away or did they not? And if they did, was it because of a COVID regulation or because they were a distraction or a combination of both?
So, Senator Ugenti-Rita, in the signature verification room, because of the spacing in those rooms, it wasn't really optimal. They couldn't maintain 6 feet of distancing, so we asked them to stay in one specific area. Okay. But in the tabulation center, it's larger, so the observers could move more freely, and we had to have them involved in the process of creating those logs.
Got it. Thank you so much. And then just one more question. And you talked about the review process that the Secretary of State did. Did you say 2009? Did you mean 2019 or did you mean 2009?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti Rita, yeah, 2019. I'm sorry if I said 2009. It was 2009. It was certified in 2019, the fall of 2019.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought you meant. Okay, wonderful. And then also, the new equipment, it's my understanding, is recently leased. Can you speak to why the decision was made to lease it versus buy it outright? And what was the decision process there? And then do you have the contract that you could share with the committee members?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti Rita, yes, we do have the contract that we can share. That is a public record.
Great.
And the reason why the county decided to lease versus purchase is right now we're using the voluntary voting system guidelines from, I think the most recent version is 2005 updated in 2015, and we're expecting new guidelines to be coming out in the next few years.
Okay.
So we didn't want to lock ourselves into equipment when new guidelines, which would potentially enhance the security even more or make further improve the tabulation systems. We didn't want to lock ourselves into a long-term purchase until those guidelines had been released.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and then those guidelines come from where? I just missed that part.
The U.S. Election Assistance Commission.
Okay, got it. And they're supposed to come out one more time. When?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti Rita, I don't have the specific date or timeline. I know that's supposed to be they're forthcoming within the next year or two.
I see. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, I'm confused, as of many voters in the state of Arizona, on the 2% audit that is statutory. You have the ability, this is my understanding, you have the ability to go higher than that. In fact, the AG, I think there was a communication from the AG that encouraged you to do that. I know that there were many legislators that reached out and asked, and maybe ask is a kind word, and asking the county to go higher. Why did you not go higher in that 2%, at least to a 5%? And I know this senator at one point called for 100% count. So could you address that, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So when we did the hand count in accordance with what state law allows for and provides. Now we started this process on the Wednesday after the election. There was communication from the Attorney General's office that asked us to go to a 5%. That came after we had already selected all the batches from the political parties. So the political parties need to be involved in this process. Additionally, state statute does not allow for us to expand those beyond what is called for. And we did a sufficient number as what is required by state statute. And what state statute does allow for is if you do find variances through that process. So there's a vote count verification committee that meets before the election, and they determine what those thresholds were. So for early ballots, I believe it was 3 votes or 5 votes and 3%. For election day ballots, it was, I believe it was 1% and 3 votes, something along those lines. So if you find any of those variances through the hand count, then that's when you're supposed to expand that hand count process. And that those statisticians that sit on that vote count verification committee, they say that this is more than sufficient to identify any indication that there could be a variance or a problem with the tabulation. So I'm confident that the 5,000 votes that we did or it was over 5,000, but for early voting and the 2% of vote centers would have identified if there was a variance through this process.
Mr. Chairman, and Scott, my understanding of statute has said that 2% is a minimum. It does not preclude you from going higher.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, once we've started the process, so I believe you're correct. If we had raised that to 5% before we started, we could have had a higher amount. But once we had started the process, we had selected 2% with the parties. based on our advice from legal counsel, we needed to stay within the 2%.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, I think that the consternation had already started building by that point, and you know, it won't go too far into the weeds. If that was a decision was made, that was a decision was made, and it may be a point that Senator Michelle Ugenti puts that at a higher percentage as we go forward in the next legislative session. But it was clear whether or not the allegations were true, false, defensible, undefensible. The public was asking for more transparency, more checks and balances, and I think it would have behooved the county to take that step and to do that. I'm not sure exactly what statute said about once you've started, to call it null and void and start again. That's another discussion for going forward. But I think the cards were on the table, and I think Senator Michelle Ugenti, we really need to take a look at that going forward. I think we could have answered a lot of the questions that we're answering today, questioning today, if there would have been a significantly higher number, a higher percentage in that count. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chairman, Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Jared. I think we're pretty much all familiar with backdoors, software developers that create backdoors so they can get back into their software. I'm assuming you've heard of that. Are you familiar with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, I'm not an IT expert on whether backdoors exist or not. But I know that in our system, how any software engineer would access the system is through an administrative password.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Jared. Mr. Chairman, my concern is, and I'll echo what Senator Leach was saying, we've got a lot of people with a lot of angst. One of the reasons we're having this committee hearing right now is that there is huge voter discomfort with what's going on and the rumors that are out there, including from the manufacturer of the software that you are using, leasing rather than buying. And there is concern about the veracity of that software. I mean, from your perspective, you may say that you've done enough, but again, when you've got potential backdoors, we're kind of assuming that the certifying agent is going to be able to thoroughly evaluate and make sure there is no backdoor and no accessibility. And that may be so, but there has been so much concern over this that I think that this raises a huge question. And I think the only way to answer that question is by doing a fuller count. And yeah, you may have had the proverbial 2% that should have satisfied, but obviously we've got thousands of voters that are not satisfied with that, hundreds of thousands. And I've personally gotten thousands and thousands of emails from across the country questioning what's gone on. So I think for the integrity of our voting system, we need to have a much fuller hand count, and we need to have a audit of that software to make sure that what you're saying, that 2% is actually totally accurate. But our voters don't believe that, and I have question marks on it too.
Okay. Senator Genti-Reedy, do you have to that point on the 2%?
I do. Just a quick question. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jared, you did the 2% of vote centers, not precinct locations, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Reedy, you're correct. We did of the vote centers. Okay. And could you have done both? Or could you have moved back to the precinct? Because I know it says precinct in statute. What, again, was the reasoning to just do the 2% of the vote centers versus 2% of
precinct?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, well, state, or at least through the Elections Procedures Manual, when you use vote centers, that calls for you to do a hand count using vote centers. So that's one reason we did it, is because that's what the Elections Procedures Manual calls for. But secondly, it's not practical for us unless we did 100% hand count, because all the ballots come back to us and are secured by vote center. So we have them, as I described earlier, in the poll workers put them into these black canvas bags. Those black canvas bags are then sealed with tamper evident seals. They come back to us. And because it's a vote center model, any voter could vote at any one of our vote centers. So the only way then to go back through and separate those ballots into a precinct would be to, first off, break the chain of custody. And then have to then manually sort through all 167,000 of those ballots into a precinct. And then you would never be able to go back and put them into a vote center order. And if a court ever called into and wanted to look at how those votes were counted for one specific vote center, we would not be able to satisfy that request.
So, Mr. Chairman, okay. So obviously there needs to be a fix there, because we have the election procedural manual that is overriding what the statute says. It looks like that was done knowing that statute didn't line with the procedural manual. So we're all going to need to work together to make sure that language fits and flows together, so we don't have that contradiction, because that led to a lot of consternation with people. But on this issue of not being able to do the precinct, I just want to get clarity on that, because as I'm looking in the Dominion contract, it says that it's capable of sorting and filtering images of ballots by ballot style, precinct, polling location, contest, or candidate for the purpose of a recount or post-election audit. Officials can review all of the digital ballot images in an election or a subset of the ballots based on the chosen filtering conditions. So just as I read that, it sounds like you can easily filter it at a precinct level.
But that's not describing a hand count. A hand count is using the actual physical ballots, and that's what the hand count boards use. So because we chose to use a vote center model, the ballots were stored, secured in those tamper evident canvas bags by vote center. There's no way to physically do that, a hand count as what's described in statute by precinct.
Okay, but I thought that, Mr. Chairman, just if you'll indulge me, I thought that the digital image was connected to an actual ballot, so that you could go find. Is it that you can't do it because it's very time consuming, perhaps, or you literally couldn't do it?
So the digital image is connected to an actual ballot. However, hand count boards don't do hand counts based on the digital images. They do it on the actual physical ballot, and that's pursuant to statute.
So to that point, so what I'm hearing is that you decided to change the voting process to these voting centers, knowing beforehand that you would not be able to satisfy the statutory obligation to do a 2% hand count by precinct. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's not correct. So statute in 2000, I believe it was 2012, allowed and authorized the use of vote centers. That was approved by the legislature. And in the Elections Procedures Manual, it clearly states that when you use vote centers, then you use the vote centers to conduct the hand count. So we made our decisions based off which the Elections Procedures Manual has the force and effect of law. So we made the decisions based off the law that was in effect at that time.
Okay, so you under current statute, you believe you have the option to do either the vote center 2% count or the precinct 2% count.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ugenti-Rita, please continue.
Okay, so if the online image of the ballot is connected with a hard paper ballot, just one more time for me, why can you not do the hand count of the precincts?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, because we are doing the hand count using the paper ballots, not the digital images. So statute requires that we do a hand count of those paper ballots. Those paper ballots come from the vote centers, so they're all stored. So if you go to any one single vote center, there could be any number of precincts in those ballots. So the only way to then get those into precinct order would then be to break the seal on all 175 vote center canvas bags, then sort them, and you'd never be able to put them back into that order that they originally came from the vote center.
So you wouldn't be able to put it back in the order that you took them out of those canvas bags, but you would be able to do it, but it's cumbersome and time consuming.
And yes, it could take, right, we're supposed to start this process, get our hand count done, and it would have taken, you know, I couldn't even estimate, but probably a week or two just to sort them into the correct order, then to perform the hand count.
Okay, would there be value in doing a hand count and a digital count, since, you know, per the contract, you can very easily, what did it say? You could very easily order, yeah, you can very easily filter the ballots depending on what it is you wanted. Would there be value in that?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ugenti-Rita, anything could have value. I believe that the current processes that we have in place through the logic and accuracy testing, that tests the functionality of the system, the certification process of this system, as well as, you know, the electronic adjudication piece to this. When those boards are performing electronic adjudication, they are creating manual logs, logging every single action that they take. They're looking at the audit marks that are created from that first ballot that goes through the tabulator to now the second audit mark that gets created when that electronic adjudication report performs that function. We create then a system generated report that those electronic adjudicators use to compare every action that they took. They take that role incredibly seriously, and they would have identified issues or errors, and they didn't through that process. So I'm confident in our system. Now, based on what Senator Gray said about voter trust and hearing of concerns, I'm concerned about that. I want voters to have 100% confidence, be as confident as I am in this election process. So I am willing to talk through what type of changes, you know, at a future date, when we start talking about legislation that could be implemented, to help rebuild that confidence so those voters have the same level of confidence that I do.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, and the reason I bring that up is I'm just trying to take advantage of the technology that you guys are leasing. So if we're going to have these digital images and store them, then perhaps we could put them to use other than just adjudicating. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Borelli, did you have a question? You're on mute, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Jarrett, one more question. When you were talking, going back to the signature verification in a signature verification room, after they verify their signatures in that room, do they open up the ballots and send them out to be tabulated, or do they keep them sealed until they get into the other room to be tabulated?
So the signature verification folks do not open up the ballots. That's a separate room. It's our early ballot processing room. Those bipartisan boards, members of different parties, do the separation. So and then after they are separated from the ballots, the ballots are separated from the envelopes, then they're transferred to our ballot tabulation center to be tabulated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, in a previous meeting, there were people that swore under oath, under penalty and perjury, that they were in that tabulating room waiting for ballots to come out of the signature verification room. And they swore that those envelopes were already opened before they got to them. Are you aware of anything like that happening? I mean, no, everybody can't be in the same place all at once. So, I mean, have you heard anything about that?
I'm not aware of that testimony, and I'm not aware of that happening in Maricopa County.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
if they only get opened once they have a good signature by our EV processing boards.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, but you just said once they verify their signatures on the envelopes, that they get sent to another room to get opened up and counted.
So, Mr. Chairman, so the process is after a ballot has a good signature, it comes back from our vendor, which it was secured in a vault. The envelope is still sealed at that point. We have a mail room with that. We send these ballots through an envelope slicer, right? We're doing this for 2 million ballots or 1.9 million ballots that came back through Maricopa County. Then they're immediately transferred from the mail room to the EV processing board, those bipartisan boards that actually remove them from the ballot. If they do not have, so the only ballots that are in our signature verification rooms are in ballots that have a need packet. Those are sealed, they're not opened. And those envelopes then will have a log of all the attempts that we are working through to try to cure that signature with the voter themselves, making phone calls, sending letters. If the signature is blank, sending that ballot back to the voter, so if time allots that they can then add their signature to the ballot and send it back to us. So, but those ballots that are in that room, the signature verification room, are not open.
Right. So when it leaves the signature verification room, even if they've made numerous phone calls trying to contact that voter, they can't contact them. Obviously, it's going to go over to a different bin because it's kind of like a dead file. But the ones that get verified and they leave that room, they are unopened, correct?
That's correct. And they would need to go to our mail room to open them and then transfer them to our early ballot processing boards.
Thank you.
Senator Leach, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jarrett, let me talk about Dominion and the people on site. When were the Dominion people, when did they arrive on site for the election, using the election day? Were they there at the beginning of early ballots being counted? Or did they come in for November 3rd? Well, let's take that question first.
Mr. Chairman, so we have actually 2 members from Dominion that have an office here in the elections department, and they assist us with working, sorry, having a connection. Mr. Chairman, can you still hear me?
I can.
Thank you. So they have an office here and they assist us with any tasks that we have, any expertise that we need. So when we implemented this system, those individuals were involved in training our staff to program elections, and training our staff to create ballots for each election. Our staff do all of that functionality now. However, those Dominion staff are available to support us through an election. And in Maricopa County, we had 5 elections this year. So they were here for that entire period. Now, there are times where they are not here and they're working on elections for other counties, but they were here before and during this election.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, were they, could they come and go as they pleased? Was that office available to them 24/7?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, they have access to our facility. They have a badge access and they're authorized to enter.
Could they, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, could they be there on their own without someone from the county watching what they were doing or how they were acting?
Mr. Chairman, yes, Dominion can enter and be here because they have access to our facility. Now, all our ballot tabulation center, anything that's connected to our reporting system is under a 24/7 live camera.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, so they could be working on the equipment without supervision from the county. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, only under our direction, but yes, they do have access to the facility.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
and-
Mr. Jarrett, direction and observation are two different things in my mind's eye. Is that correct, Mr. Jarrett?
But you are, as you described, they do have the ability to access the facility when we have staff members not here.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, being under camera, as we've already discussed with the distance that poll watchers and poll workers had to be, and submitting the approval of using binoculars, might that camera have the same problem, being a substantial distance away from what the Dominion workers were actually doing?
So Mr. Chairman, I'd say there's many controls in process that would prevent them from doing anything and tampering with the equipment that we would not identify. First is that logic and accuracy test that's done by the Secretary of State as well as our staff. That confirms the firmware that's installed on the equipment. That's done the day before we mail out any ballots. If there was anything that had been altered on this equipment, we would identify it at that point in time. We do another logic and accuracy test post the election to confirm that it's the exact same software that's programmed on this equipment. And then, as I described before, if there had been any changes or altercations made of the equipment during the process, that would have rendered all those ballots that we sent out, those 2 million ballots that we sent out, any ballot that we print in the vote center, unreadable by our tabulators. So the Dominion staff that are working here could not make any changes during election without us detecting them.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, in an earlier point that I think that you were making to a question that I had, you said it depends on how the audit request or the audit guidelines are written. Would you have any input on how it should be written to make sure that all the above that I just talked about, and not limited to that, could be included in any such audit done by the county or anyone else?
Yes, when we are drafting the RFP or the scope of work, I could provide some assistance in that process. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, thank you for your answers, but let me share with you, and it goes back to what Senator Gray said. There seems to be in the part of the county a lot of checks and balances. Maybe some of it just hasn't gotten out to the public. Part of this, the reason for this meeting, I think the chairman's holding it, is to get this information out. But secondarily, we need to know going forward if in fact the lawsuit were to end today, the appeal was end today, and you would go into an audit, I would hope that members of this committee would have direct involvement in establishing parameters for the audit, obviously with expert help. And should the committee have to go forward on its own, certainly we would like to know how to structure that. So that's more of a comment than a question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chairman, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Jarrett, going back to the Dominion office, what kind of work did they do? I'm assuming they had computers there. Were they using their computers to facilitate what you needed them to do?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gray, yes, they have computers that our IT staff provide them. And yes, when we have requests for assistance, they assist us. Now, the computers that they're using on a daily basis are not connected to the election reporting system or the Dominion software. These are in their office. We actually have access to that office. It's really a cubicle that they sit in, and there's no way for us to not be able to see what's going on at any point in time when they're in their office work.
So Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, you're saying that they have absolutely no connection or capability of having connection with the software at all?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gray, let me clarify. So in the computers that they're using on a daily basis, those do not. But yes, we give them, and under supervision and under direction, we ask them to assist with some expertise of the election reporting system, especially during election when we're transferring files from batches to the report. They are accessing the actual election reporting system. So they are manning some of those stations, but entirely when we have staff available during an election.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jared, I also heard you say that if there was any change, that basically the software would not function right, the machines would not work. So are you telling me if there is an X or an O, maybe a few X's and O's, 6 of them, that are changed in that software, that it will totally malfunction?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, that's correct. Once we finalize that election programming code for those ballots, there's the hash code, the marks the timing marks that will tell the tabulator when to award a vote or not a vote. That is unique to each election. So if there was any change to an election code during the process, it would render all the remaining ballots unreadable. All the pre-printed ballots that we mailed out, or ballots that then would be printed at a vote center on election day to be tabulated.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jared, my concern is that, again, depending on the requirement of change, if there was a major change, whether or not that software would cause that machine to malfunction, or whether or not it was structured to where if there were certain minor changes, that it would, in essence, still maintain its veracity as a functioning piece of software, but it could impact the election. And the only reason I say that is there's huge concern about the reliability and the potential compromise of Dominion software.
So, Mr. Jarrett, who is it that writes the code for that software? Is it your office or is it the vendor?
So, Mr. Chairman, so our office programs each specific election and creates the ballot style, but the source code is written by the vendor and the manufacturer. So there's two different pieces of code, right? The source code is what that goes through the EAC Elections Assistance Commission through their certification process. That is proprietary software. Our staff have no knowledge or expertise in what that source code is involved with the source code.
So
but a specific election, sorry, go ahead.
Are you suggesting that those who have written the source code couldn't modify it at all without invalidating that election? I mean, is that what you're saying? There's no possible way for them to modify the code?
So, Mr. Chairman, based on my understanding of the system is that once we program a specific election on using that software, any alteration or change to the software or that election program itself would then render those ballots that we've created not readable. Okay.
I'm not a programmer, but I have a hard time believing that the people who are writing the underlying source code could not incorporate the code that has been written in for a specific election, which is layered over the source code. My concern here, Mr. Jarrett, is not that there was malfeasance. I don't know. But I do have a concern that the county is taking the position that it just can't happen. I mean, there is a litany of white collar crimes, digital crimes in the history of this country and in this world from some very sophisticated people, and the victims didn't recognize it until some future time. So again, I'm not making any allegations, but I think it's really, really dangerous for us to say it can't happen. I think we need to be open to the fact that it can. And I'm not just talking about this election, I'm talking about future elections. That's from a personal perspective, I just think that's a dangerous position to take.
To that point, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Gray, to that point.
Yes, that's one of the reasons I brought up the concern about these minor changes in the software program, because they do know their software, and obviously they're selling their product, but they know their software. And when you can go in and you can tinker with something, there's a possibility. And as the chairman said, I'm not saying that that's what happened. Let me be clear. I am not saying that that's what happened. But what I am saying is there is enough concern by our voters in our county that do have concerns about it, and I have questions about that. You are very confident that nothing happened. I hope that's the case, but I think it behooves us, when there are concerns, to verify that. That's why I think it's critical that we have an independent, qualified team of cyber experts that can come in and do a audit of that software and make sure that nobody else has touched that after. And I'm assuming, and I hope that you would have locked that down and not had your Dominion employees working on that to be able to make changes to take it back. But I think, again, for our voters' sense of confidence in our voter system, we have to have that type of forensic audit to make sure that what we've got is a viable piece of software that wasn't contaminated, that didn't skew voters. And that's important, whether Republican or Democrat. A vote is a protected, people have died for that. Our majority whip, Senator Borelli, has fought for that overseas. So it's a high priority, I think, that should provoke the county to say, we need to verify this at whatever it takes to make sure that there isn't one little piece that was changed that wouldn't have been big enough to completely cause a dysfunction in the software, but could have compromised the voting integrity of those machines.
Thank you. Senator Borelli. You're on mute, Senator.
I figured you guys like me on mute a lot, so.
I'll second that.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, I agree with the chairman that your position that this is like 100% secure and safe is a little misleading, because even in the owner's manual or the operations manual, the Dominion software on section 8.2, beginning on page 41, it actually clarifies and says how data can be changed and votes switched around and so on and so forth. So now I have my question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett. Now, I remember watching a Board of Supervisors meeting where one of the Board of Supervisors said that, obviously, you just stated that Dominion software people have an office space in the county building, that you provided them with all that convenience. So you had also said that no nefarious things can happen because everything is on camera. So is there a camera in their office space that's monitored 24/7?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, so in their office space, they don't have access to the election reporting system. So the actual system that we use to program any election on it, the server itself, they have zero access to that system from their office space.
Okay, but you do not have video cameras in their office, so you really can't see what they're doing in their office, correct?
That's correct. We do not have cameras of their office, but again, they have zero access to the actual election reporting system from their office.
Okay, so you also stated that they're not hooked up. They're hooked up to the internet in their office, but it's actually an internal internet. But there's Wi-Fi on their laptops, and they've had laptops. And Wi-Fi, I'm in my condo right now on my laptop, and I'm hooked up to the Wi-Fi. And so to say that they don't have any other access sending data outside a secure area, that's a pretty strong statement. So I kind of find it hard I'm not calling you any names or inferring anything. I just find it really difficult to believe that, look, nothing's 100% secure. If people want to cheat, they're going to cheat. People want to steal. That's why we put locks on doors. But but our constituents are screaming for blood. They want to make sure that their right, their obligation, their privilege to vote is protected 100%. And the integrity has to be maintained. And I, regardless of Republican or Democrat, just for future elections, we need to make sure that this is the protection of our democratic republic. So, you know, and anything that can be any computer can be programmed to do all kinds of stuff. They had in Michigan, they had 2 changes that only the audit was able to actually discover. So naturally, you all did the preliminary testing, which is good but you know, a lot of things happen during the performance of the system. So I really think hopefully we can work something out here where we get some continued cooperation from Maricopa County that we can get to the bottom of this. Anyway, I'm sorry, I just made a statement, but I find your statement that this is secure and 100% accuracy and integrity is a little bit hard to swallow. No accusations to you, my friend.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Quesada, do you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I wanted to get some clarification from Mr. Jarrett, because I think our last couple of members that have asked you questions have implied that you are communicating that it is impossible for any wrongdoing to occur. And I'm not sure I heard that. What I'm hearing from you through your testimony is that you believe that if there were any type of improper activity, if that did happen, if codes were changed, if ballots were tampered with, that there would be evidence of that because of the multiple safeguard procedures that were in place that would basically raise a red flag and say to you, this is something that needs a closer look. And that through these multiple safeguards, these oversights, these audits, these protections that have been implemented, there hasn't been any evidence of that. Is that what I'm hearing you say, that it's not an impossibility, it's just that there's zero evidence of that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Quesada, that's absolutely correct. I've not testified that it's 100% accurate or that it's impossible. What I've testified is I'm confident in our system and the integrity of our system and the security of our system through the combination of everything through EAC certification to the Secretary of State certification, to the logic and accuracy test, the programming, to the staff, the expertise of my staff at the elections department, to the post logic and accuracy tests, to the hand count audits that did not find any issues, and through all those court cases where we submitted evidence, we went back and did additional review. So through all of that process is what leads me to have confidence in our election that it was done that way. But I've not testified that it's unfathomable or impossible for something to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't think anyone was confused, Mr. Quesada. In fact, my position was that the source code, because the county doesn't have access to the source code, nor did they develop the source code could be changed, and if it could hide what they're doing, the testimony was they could not do that. That would be impossible for them to do that without us knowing, because it would invalidate. That's the concern that I have. When we believe that it's impossible for them to do something without us knowing, that opens the door to, in my opinion, maybe overconfidence is the best way to put it. Okay, we have Senator Leach. You have your digital hand up. You need to unmute, Senator.
Should be up and live now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett. There have been allegations of increased internet traffic, IP traffic, from the 3rd of November on. Could you address that and maybe put a fine point on the internet connection? I know that you've said that it wasn't connected to the internet. I'm not sure if there was a stop date on that when it was connected to the internet, and the amount and the direction of this internet traffic being being alleged?
Mr. Chairman, members, I am not aware of any increased internet activity coming from our election department servers, so I can't speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Jarrett.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Jarrett, do you have more of your presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one more slide.
Okay, apparently we have Mr. Gray. Do you want to, okay, you want to wait till after the slide? Okay, Mr. Jarrett, please go ahead and finish your presentation.
So the last piece of my presentation just goes over the security of the election, and we've actually talked through many components of this through the questions from the committee. But just wanted to highlight, and there's no way that I can describe every single security protocol that we implement to ensure the security of the election, but wanted to highlight several of them. First is we do restrict access to the ballot tabulation center, the vault, the server, to individuals that have a need to be in there, so a direct job responsibility oversight. This does include the Dominion staff that do have responsibilities to serve us under our direction. We perform background checks, criminal background checks at the county level, the state level, and the national level of all of our employees. This includes our full-time staff, and we do this as well as for temporary staff. We do voter registration confirmation. Now this serves a couple items. First, you can't vote if you have a felony. And so that confirms they don't have a felony on their record. And we need to confirm party affiliation. So when we're assigning members to these boards, these electronic adjudication boards, duplication boards, EV processing boards. But it's also, we verify voter registration information for political party observers. We don't do a background check on the observers themselves. The parties themselves appoint these individuals, but we do a voter registration check before we allow them into these sensitive areas. We have, it's been mentioned many times that our tabulation equipment is on a hardwired, isolated network, and it's not connected to the internet. There was a discussion item made earlier about making this information available to the voters. And we have a BeBallotReady.vote website where voters can go and get a customized dashboard to check their voter registration status, all those types of things. But we have actually several useful videos on that site. And one of them covers tabulation security. And you can actually trace, the video even traces the wires from the tabulators themselves to the server room. You can see many of the security protocols right through that video. Probably does even a better job of articulating what our security protocols are than mine, than I'm doing today. So a very useful video. There's also videos on there on ID and you need to vote at a voting location, early ballot processing. So those types of things, a lot of good, useful information. Talked about the security fobs and the passwords. So many different layers of security for the equipment themselves. Not only do you need to have a key to access it, you need to be able then to have the password itself to be able to access any system. That includes our central count tabulators, as well as the tabulators that are out at the vote centers. We have different user modes and different security settings on this equipment. I described that we have a user mode. So once our election is active for our central count tabulators, they are put into a user mode where they only can accept, they can scan, accept, or reject ballots. No other activity can be done on those central count tabulators in that user mode, and they stay in that mode for the entirety of the election. So we have an error gap. We do have to report results to our website and to the Secretary of State's website, but we create an error gap. So anytime that we plug a device into our election reporting system, it is only used once. So we immediately open it from a sealed package. We open that device, and then that's when we insert it in to create a copy of those reports, those result reports. And then we take that thumb drive and we take it to a dedicated laptop that's only used to report results. But we never reuse that thumb drive. That thumb drive is then secured, and we keep that in our vault. and it will eventually be transferred to the treasurer's vault for the 2 years of record keeping as required by statute. I talked about our encrypted data memory cards, the tamper evident seals that are on the ports, how those have to be programmed simultaneously together. If you were to remove one of those memory cards from our precinct-based tabulator, that tabulator would not operate. If you were to accidentally exchange that tabulator, mix up the memory cards from that one in a second tabulator, neither tabulator would work. It has to be the two that were programmed simultaneously. Those are encrypted, and then we have a very secure chain of custody process to return those back to the county. We also have robust audit logs on all of our systems. When a ballot goes through one of our central count tabulators or our precinct-based tabulators, there's an audit mark affixed to that digital image of the ballot that shows exactly how that tabulator calculated each contest or awarded each contest. So that is affixed through an audit mark. If that ballot had to go through electronic adjudication due to an overvote or a voter intent issue or a write-in, a new complete audit mark would be affixed to show how that tabulator was going to be read by our reporting system after the electronic adjudicators reviewed that ballot. We also use hard copy original ballots. So voters vote on a hard copy ballot. Those ballots, because of our new system and the digital images that they create, those ballots can be immediately secured. What you're seeing in this photo here on the left is our vault with all the different batches of all those 1.9 million early ballots that were tabulated in this election. And then everything is on under camera 24/7, 365 days a year. So we have all that's video footage, and that video footage is backed up and available for review. So with that, that does conclude my presentation. I know that we have more presentations, one for Mr. Liddy as well, but if there are any other outstanding questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
How long is that video stored? How long is it available?
So statute does require us to keep it through the entire election cycle for a November general election, and through the challenge period. And because we have these ongoing court cases, we've extended it, and we do have it all the way through this cycle as a backup.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gray, you had questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. One question, again, going back to Dominion, when was their last point of contact where you've asked them to do something that would have caused them to interface with the machines and their software?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, I'd have to go through my records to see when my last specific contact was. I don't know that on the top of my head.
If you could get that for us, I think that would be very important. Again, my concern is the integrity of what was done and the feasibility of evaluating that. Another question I have outside of Dominion is, are you familiar with the grant that was given to Maricopa County from the the Center of Tech and Civic Life?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, yes, I am aware of that grant.
Okay, that was a $3 million, almost $3 million. Is this, and I know this was, you're fairly new in your position, but can you tell me, were there any other years where we've had a private organization that gave money for our elections?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, I can't speak to any prior years or elections. I know that this year was unique in responding to the challenges of COVID-19, needing to purchase new ballot on demand printers, making Dropbox sites available, all of those types of additional things. But what I do know is Maricopa County actually hasn't even expended any monies related to that grant at this point.
Well, I guess my concern, and I'm wondering if this is a concern for you, this group, which was funded by Mark Zuckerberg, known to have a little bit of an interest in politics, But he funded that to the tune of $350 million. Interestingly, he only targeted swing states in this election, and specifically areas that would produce possibly the best results for a certain side of the election. Does that raise any concern to you? I know it does to me, because as far as I'm concerned, I would have the same concerns as if we had the Koch brothers in funding certain things, and we had, you know, basically if they put together a software package that they sold to election officers and states specifically, that and then we had some other millionaire, possibly a Donald Trump, in the next election that helped fund millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. To me, that would raise some concern. So was that anything that anybody has considered down at Maricopa County?
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gray, the acceptance of that money did not influence any of the operations. When that was being reviewed, it was, would it align with and help pay for the initiatives that we were already planning to implement for this election?
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jarrett, I'm not trying to infer that did at all influence you at all. And I do want to say, I think, you know, looking at what you've done, I think kudos to the election department. You've been very thorough, very detailed. I would not want to have to do the job that you guys have done down there with all the details and the huge amount of work that was done. So I applaud you for all your work. I'm not questioning your integrity or the intent of anybody in the county. My concern is, again, with the veracity of this election process, and that's not just coming from me, it's echoed by thousands and thousands of our Maricopa County voters. And so that's why I am pressing, again, to have an audit to verify that absolutely nothing was done, a forensic audit on our equipment and the software. But again, I do want to applaud you for all of the extreme care that you've taken in making sure that what was done was as thorough as you could make it. But again, as you said, you're not a software expert. My concern is I'm not a software expert either. And so I would like to see software experts actually do a thorough audit, forensic audit of that software, to make sure that our voters can be able to say, this was a fair election. That's all I want to see, is this was a fair election. And I think that's what our voters want to see, and it's what our voters deserve. But again, thank you for all the work that you've done in sharing that information, and all the work you've done in making this process, election process, as secure as it was.
And I think you're questioning, Senator Gray, of the $3 million is an issue of optics. Even if nothing was done that was nefarious, it still erodes the level of confidence by the voters when they learn that there is private money from either side that has come in to help run the elections department. So I would say that's something that needs to be addressed.
To that point, Mr. Chairman, that's why I brought it up. And it's the proverbial, if there's smoke, there's fire. You know, I don't have evidence myself, and there's obviously been a lot of court cases where there hasn't been enough evidence. And as I've told many people, it's easy to argue a case in the court of public opinion, much tougher to argue a case in the court of justice. But again, where there's smoke, there's usually fire, or the potential of it. So yeah, that's exactly why I brought it up, is just to raise those concerns. And to me, it should encourage us to just prove to our voters that we've had a completely reliable election, so that they can feel confident that what came out of this is fair and accurate.
Thank you. Senator Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up and maybe make a closing comment on this particular portion of what we're hearing today. You know, it is one thing, and I appreciate the work that the county has done. I've said this before in the opening remarks. Scott, thank you for the detail that you went into, but I am concerned about when we or the county puts themselves in a position that said, this was the best election, the best protected election. There's always room to make improvement, to catch something that we should have done, should have, could have, would have done better. Particularly now in an election where we have millions of eyeballs looking at every vote, every postmark, every iota of this election. I would hope that your enthusiasm for what was accomplished, what you believe was accomplished in this election, does not get in the way of coming with a long laundry list, said we could have done this better, or the state needs to do this. And this goes not only to you, Scott, and this part of what I'm saying goes out to all of our counties. Bring it to us so that next time that we have this amount of voting that we had, the plethora of early ballots, that we are better prepared, and our statutes are prepared to handle it, along with county ordinances, procurement regulations, how people are certified, what kind of training they go through, how will they actually know that when we train them for the 4 hours that it's stuck, and it was put into. There's just a lot of things that I know I have questions on, and I think from the questions this morning and the comments this morning from fellow committee members, they have the same. And so, however this all turns out, I would hope that you would have a ready list when Michelle Genti-Rita gavels in January of things that we can do better and make better, so we can get the integrity of an election system back into Arizona, which is sorely tarnished right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, in our mission statement for the Maricopa County Elections Department is to continuously improve and to evaluate. And absolutely, there were areas that we can improve upon. And we're already working through that with our teams. They're doing focus groups with our poll workers right now. We're hearing feedback from voters. So I can make that commitment, absolutely, that we will go through an initiative and be able to put together all the areas where we think that we can improve for elections moving forward.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Genti-Rita. You're on mute. Senator Genti-Rita, you're on mute.
How about now?
No, we can hear you. Please
You can
proceed.
hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to touch on one of the bullets here in the last slide. For me, a big part of voter integrity is making sure that those individual voters are meeting our eligibility requirements to vote. So you've got on here, as part of your security bullets, voter registration confirmation. Can you talk to exactly what you do to make sure that those people who are indeed eligible to vote are voting? And I'm not just talking about individuals' citizenship requirements, that's a huge one, but talk to me about cleaning up the voter rolls, removing people who are ineligible, for instance, either people who don't live here anymore or unfortunately are deceased. Do you play a role in maintaining, or at least working with, the county recorder's office to help maintain the voter rolls in any capacity?
So maintaining those rolls does fall within the voter registration team that reports up to the recorder's office. So I don't have oversight over that specific process.
Okay, so since that's a huge part of, again, voter confidence and election integrity, what do you mean you don't have any role? Would you want a role?
That's between you and So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Genti-Rita, that is established in state statutes that assigns the roles and responsibilities for administering an election, and through then the Maricopa County Elections Operation Agreement between the recorder himself and then the Board of Supervisors. So I take my direction on what role they want to assign me.
Okay. And who do you mean they, the Board of Supervisors assigns you, or are you talking about the Recorder's Office?
So that would be established in the Elections Operations Agreement that's negotiated between the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors and the Recorder.
Okay, so that intergovernmental agreement, which has been around for a long time, you don't have the Maricopa, you're telling me that the Board of Supervisors has no role in working collaboratively with the Recorder's Office to make sure that our voter registration rules are up to date?
Senator Ugenti-Rita, I think Mr. Liddy can probably answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, these are questions that really are best presented to council, but the statute is what the statute is. Maricopa County does what the state legislature tells us to do. Certain powers are with the recorder. Certain authority over elections are with the recorder. And your specific questions are regarding the maintenance of the voter file and the procedures by which we keep that voter file up. It's important everywhere, but it's extremely important in Maricopa County, where we have very transient population, people moving within Maricopa County all the time, each time they need to re-register to vote or update. So it's a very important question. But the operations agreement for the elections between the recorder and the Board of Supervisors was changed very recently. So it was established in the 80s. It was changed very recently. So it's not something that's been long established. And so we can get into questions on that if you want to. But really for this particular public employee, that's one level above his area. The relationship between the Board of Supervisors and the constitutional office of the recorder and how they're going to divvy that up via statute and via delegation is really not a question that would go to this witness, but maybe to the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I can certainly provide some background on what's happened in the past, but even I can't tell you what will happen in the future. But that is certainly an area that the legislature may want to work with the counties.
Senator Ugenti-Rita, would you like to, I believe that the chairman is still on. Chairman Hickman, is he still, it looks like he is. Do you want to ask questions of him, or what would you like to do?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Yes. So again,
there he is like magic. You just say his name and he pops up. That's amazing.
Well, I can just say I'm enjoying the conversation for all of us, including the voter, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Good. Senator Michelle Ugenti-Rita, please.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I am very familiar with the intergovernmental agreement between the two offices. So I'm just, again, wondering, since you had it on your slide, that you do, at some level, try to make sure that those voting are indeed supposed to be voting. You send out that form to make sure that people are at their said addresses. So you are involved in some capacity. Are you not involved any deeper because of that intergovernmental agreement? And if so, perhaps that should be changed. Because again, making sure those who are eligible to vote, I mean, that's where kind of it all starts. So can you, Mr. Hickman, talk to me about, again, your position, or maybe even the board's position regarding your... Sure.
Let me just put, I can't talk about the board's position. The only thing I can say is the EOA that you're discussing started under started under the talking with our recorder, our currently elected recorder. Started under Chairman Shukri's direction. And then it was framed under Bill Gates' direction when he was chairman last year. And it was put into effect on elections for the first time on the presidential preference election, the primary, and the general election. So clearly there are statutory mandates according to the Board of Supervisors when it comes to day of and tabulation. And clearly there is still the statutory requirements of the elected recorder. So what you were talking about is sometimes we are identifying in this 2 years, we are identifying things either with the cooperation of the recorder to make changes.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also have been times where we have come to the state legislature for you guys to make changes accordingly. Do I foresee a time, do I foresee after what we've dealt with this election? Yes, I have a feeling we will be having hearings in front of your committee to continue to bring transparency to the well, transparency and confidence with the election, no matter what that is. We will have the voter has spoken, and the voter has hired a new recorder that will be sworn in January. I'm sure that our board will be having discussions with him and his authorities, but the voter has hired him to run that department, and registration is under the recorder, and the maintenance of the lists are under the recorder. So might we see each other again, or the future chairman? Yes, you might be seeing him along with the recorder, if so desired and necessary. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. And that's exactly my understanding too, that power is vested, at least right now, and has been with the recorder's office. Now, you know,
all recorders, all recorders,
yes,
all 15 recorders, of all the counties, yes.
Yes, that's important. It's not just you guys, it's all counties. Thank you, Mr. Higman. I think that's important. You guys do take positions on these bills. So it's kind of a mixed message. You know, if I've done bills to try to update the people list, and the counties have taken positions in opposition to that. But no, here I want to ask questions about maintaining lists, and then you know, we could get to the recorder. But in any event, I think this certainly demonstrates that, you know, we probably should look at who's responsible for maintaining these lists, because they are critical to running an election with integrity, because we do want to make sure only those who are eligible to vote are voting. So I appreciate the answers. It's been very helpful. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you. And I'd like to clarify that, because there have been bills that have been sponsored in the past to clean up Pevel and some other things, and we always hear that it's a suppression of vote. But I would suggest, and I want to know if you agree, Mr. Chairman, that keeping the voter rolls as up to date and in real time as possible is integral to us having a system that we can have confidence in. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, and I actually think the recorder, be it the soon-to-be former recorder as well as the new recorder, would probably agree also. The speed of technology, the transient nature of Maricopa County with the people that vote here, probably call for that. But that's, again, that will be up to the discussion for you. Well, not you per se in January, but Ms. Ugenti Rita as well. I'm sorry, Senator Ugenti Rita, as well as her Judiciary Committee and the legislature, in order to bring clarity and comfort. And hopefully it will be something that can be signed by the governor, and we can then affect our statutory authority upon it.
Great, thank you. And just a clarification, she will be chairing the Elections Committee.
Okay. I get confused. There's only 5 of us
right.
that have to work things. So.
Right, and the committees change every session, or every term, I should say, so we understand that. Okay, Senator Ugenti Rita, do you have any other questions? And I would certainly encourage that some of the things that we've looked at in the past that were unsuccessful, that those be revisited to try to clean up those roles. I think that's really important. Okay, Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you so much. This is not to the point. I just have a couple of statements. You know, the legislature has failed to adequately fund upgrades to outdated tabulation equipment. and I don't think we should be questioning the Board of Supervisors of Maricopa County or any about accepting money in these times of increased need for cybersecurity and updating. We all want our systems to be efficient and secure. I've been on the ballot every year for the primary in general since 2008, and I can still remember the year when Eric Spencer was the election director, and he called me to tell me that our systems, there were outside foreign interests who were attempting to breach the Secretary of State's website. And that trickles down to, votes cast and things. To another point, I registered to vote in Arizona in 2004, and I actually had to have a, I want to say certified, notarized, and probably both birth certificate from the state of my birth. So I am very confident that only citizens, residents of Arizona are casting votes in our election. And I do have to tell you one thing. I did find someone who was registered to vote who was not a qualified person, and that person never voted. So they didn't break the law, and we did. And that was, the person I found in knocking on thousands and thousands of doors. There was some, not many, more than a handful, but I believe like under 25 cases of voter fraud, and they existed. And a few cases were prosecuted, and the problem was that people, and a couple of them were senior citizens, one older case from Green Valley, of people who voted in Arizona as well as another state. And eventually they were caught. Some of them got off because they were confused and because of age, and others were prosecuted. So the rest of our election system in Arizona is very safe. It's very, very secure. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and others.
Thank you. So, Mr. Jarrett, with that statement, would you agree that you're underfunded and you weren't able to